brain data we collect. It's insane. This is the ultimate wearable. This is the most important organ in our body, and we're not yet tracking it. When it comes to your brain, limitless is like literally the right word. And for so many things, that's not true. But it's also the hardest, most complex system in our entire bodies that we know the least amount about. And I'm not saying we're solving everything. We're probably going to be 1% of the entire solution when this is all done. But it's unlocking a very key aspect that hasn't been accessible to better understand humankind.
I was thinking about how I really wanted to talk to you today.
Yeah.
Your assistant had initially suggested like a month from now. And I thought, I really want to do it now because I think that's such an interesting moment psychologically where, you know, after more than 10 years of developing this product, what is now the most advanced non-invasive brain-computer interface in history, you have just sent this out to the media a few days ago. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now you have about a month of time for them to play with it and figure it out and write their articles, and then you release to the world, you know, and it goes to the market, to consumers.
Yeah.
After having already been used by Department of Defense and military uses, obviously. But so the question is, you know, you've put so much time in. I've, you know, spent time with you and seen just how incredibly hard this has been for so long.
Man,
and
10
now,
years, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about that.
So the question that can only be asked in this moment is, how do you feel right now? Waiting to see how the world will react to things you've been working on for 10 years.
Well, I think before I talk about how I feel right now, I'll talk about how I felt once we finally shipped the product, because I think that was a magical moment. You know, it was like there's this saying in Silicon Valley, if you're not ashamed of your first product, you released too late, right? And I honestly think that we did release too late because I love our product. Like, you know, like it looks gorgeous. The audio is incredible. The app works really well. You know, like for a V1, I think we really knocked it out of the park. Now we'll see what the reviewers think. At the end of the day, like I'm biased but like honestly, I'm also very demanding. Like, and we've had to redo the app, and we've done close to 300 people worth of user testing before we release this product out. You know, anytime we had a hardware delay, we're just like, all right, let's make a better experience. Let's make a better app. And so, and you know, what's crazy is like, even with all of like that work, I still feel like it could be better. And I know that's going to be like, you know, there's certain things where I'm just like, man, I really hope the reviewers don't see all these flaws, right? You know, it's kind of like an artist when he sees his painting, like all you can see is your flaws, right? So I'm both very proud, but I'm also like kind of horrified. I'm like, man, I really hope that, you know, these reviews come out really positively. And on top of that, I'm just insanely proud of the team. Like this is them, you know, like when we hit ship and it was at the end of the day, I told them essentially one thing, which is like, this stopped being my vision a long time ago. You know, the tech that they've built is beyond what I had even thought or even created at the University of Michigan, right? It's been their building, you know, at least for the past, let's say 6 to 8 years, right? Like a lot of the reason that I wake up is for them, right? Like I obviously care about the vision and what we're doing, but it's also because I want to help them reach that vision too, right? And it was this beautiful feeling where it was the first time in my life where like I finally felt like I delivered something. You know what I'm saying? Like it's crazy. And sure, I mean, like I'm sure that there's been other things that I've done that have created value in this world, but this is like a real milestone, right? And I think that especially when I see the first person wearing it in the streets that, you know, I've never seen before, like that's going to give me the greatest joy like I think I'll ever feel, right? And how do I feel today, given all that and all those like amazing, beautiful feelings? I'm back to the grind. I give myself 24 hours of happiness, and then the hardest part about being successful is you got to keep being successful. Like that's so we're back at it. I mean, the team is now we're saying, okay, cool, press has it. When's our next big bump? It's going to be when people finally get their product,
Yep.
right? So what are we going to do to the app to fix the flaws so that when we get it to those people, they've already been solved? And so
Yeah.
we're like back to being laser focused, like it was nice reminiscing right now again, that feeling, but at the end of the day, like I gotta stay laser focused and like I have the data to prove it too. Like literally, I'll show you something kind of crazy. So this is the app that we built, and everyone is testing focus sessions like crazy to make sure things are working, right? And you can just see, so the higher this blue line, the more focused I am. I'm
Yeah.
just like locked in. Like when I'm working, I'm like an animal. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I'm back to work. Like we need to make this the best application that users are going to get. And that's just my mentality. Give yourself 24 hours and move on.
So I think we should talk a little bit about what is a brain computer interface before we go too far into the
Right?
rest of this conversation, because I have questions about, the difference between shipping to consumers through a pair of headphones. I can say that now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
By the time this comes out, versus, shipping to an Air Force pilot inside of a helmet or something like that. How that's different and why you're choosing to go which direction into the future. But maybe before we get into that, can you explain for people who might not be that aware yet, because this is
Yeah.
new stuff, what is a brain computer interface?
Yeah, definitely. A brain computer interface in like the simplest form is just any type of technology that's able to take information from your brain and help you interface with it. And so typically you see it as Neuralink is probably the biggest example of it that people know about. So,
Elon Musk's
implanting a
company.
chip,
Yeah.
Elon, yeah, exactly. But you can do it non-invasively, which means non-surgically, right? The main issue is that these devices are like these like large systems like you have here, right? This is one of our older headsets. They usually have these like large sensors. This actually is a VR. You put it on like that.
Yeah.
And the hard thing is, well, the reason that they look like this is because they just have really bad signal. And so that's really what our company focuses on, which is like we develop AI to boost the signals. So instead of these like large, crazy scientific looking devices, we can bring it down to the headphones that I'm wearing right now, essentially.
You're wearing them right now?
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, this is the silver color.
I love it. I love it. So, so why would somebody want to interface their brain with a computer?
Yeah, there's so many reasons, right? The first one is, at least the one that's most obvious to people is, let's say you have a severe disability and you need to communicate to a caregiver, right? That's the main use case that, for example, Neuralink is using, Elon Musk company. But there's also this huge landscape of areas where, arguably there's some of the most important things for mass scale humankind, right? For example, tracking things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, identifying things like ADHD, even something as simple as tracking your focus and knowing when to take a break, because your body is normally, when your body's tired, that's when you take a break, but your brain's been tired for so much longer. So knowing when your brain needs a break can help, prevent burnout. Long-term burnout can lead to things like depression, etc.
Hmm.
And so it's the first time a brain computer interface enables humanity for the first time, instead of being controlled by their brain, to actually be the ones to gather information and control their brain, right? That's like crazy. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy to think about.
So what kind of information is it actually gathering?
Yeah, it's just really, large scale electrical activation. So your neurons fire inside your brain. If there's a collection of neurons big enough, it can actually go through your scalp and be picked up essentially with sensors around your ear. In my case, right now, I have these silver lines right here that are essentially recording my brain activity.
And so those sensors existed before. Have the sensors themselves improved recently, or is it mostly AI being applied to the data to increase the when you say signal, increase the signal, what you mean is increase the quality of the data that you're getting, right? So it's
Exactly.
not just sort of a lot of randomness.
Exactly. There's just so much noise. The lights around you create noise. The fact that there's microphones next to the sensors create noise. Like me talking and moving my eyes, all of those things create noise that infect the signal that we collect, so that I'm picking up mouth movements instead of brain data, right? And
Right.
so our
And you don't
technology
mean
essentially,
audio noise, you mean like data noise.
yeah, just like the sensors
Yeah.
pick up anything that
Yeah.
essentially is interacting with them. And so our goal is, how do we isolate the brain data and make sure it's reliable even under all those conditions, essentially.
Yeah. And being able to do that is what makes Neurable special, right?
Exactly, exactly. And it wasn't done overnight. It took 10 years.
Yeah.
Took
Yeah.
7,000 people worth of data collection, refining models, 30 plus patents. I mean, people ask us like, what's your like silver bullet? And I tell them there's no silver bullet. It's just 10 years of lead bullets. It's just waking up every single day and trying to create a masterpiece, trying to make it better and better and better, putting your 10,000 hours in until it finally got to the point that here we are now, right?
So I want to get into that sort of your own journey, but maybe in a little bit, I want to just pull a little bit more on these questions around what could be possible with this technology. Um, and maybe in sort of two different timescales. One is like, what do you hope will be possible 25 years from now, um, as a result of what may be built, on top of where you are today? Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't predict the future, but what are some of those things that you could imagine that kind of ignite you and think, man, if we could get there? You've told me some of them already, but
Yeah,
yeah, maybe we
definitely,
start there.
definitely. I think that there's like actually two angles, and one that I haven't told you before, which I think is really cool. So like, yes, we created a brain computer interface that looks like a pair of headphones and organically can be integrated into your everyday life. There's so many incredible things that you can do with that. But it's also a smart headphone. There's a chip in here that runs applications essentially, right? And so we're also enabling developers to use that, right? And think about, like, for example, how we went from the Nokia to the BlackBerry to the iPhone. We're going to
Yeah.
see a large transformation happening with hearable devices too, where all these dumb headphones essentially just did audio. That's the Nokia, right? This is like the next step up, right? We can run apps. We actually have a really cool app where you can like use head motions to respond to text messages with ChatGPT, right? Like that's sick, right?
Wow.
We have another one that we're working that can automatically pause your Audible when you lose focus, right? And I can't wait to see what people create in the next 5, 10, 15 years, 25 years, as these devices transition from dumb to smarter devices. And then eventually AR is going to be there, right? And the rims of the glasses, the AR glasses you use, those are going to have brain sensors, right? And
Hmm.
all the apps and everything that we're building right now just transition up and actually even get bigger, because now we can add eye tracking. Now we can add a screen. Everything that we're building right now is zero interface. There's no way to touch it. But once we add a screen, it adds value, right? So that's kind of on the smartphone end.
Hmm.
And then on the neuroscience end, like, I think it would, it's going to be the first time that we're going to be able to at scale see the brain, right? We're working with the Department of Defense right now, and one of the key things that they have is looking at traumatic brain injuries.
Mm-hmm.
What does a person's brain look like before they serve, while they serve, and if they get some sort of traumatic brain injury, how much time do they need for recovery? And then after they become veterans, because veterans have twice the likelihood of committing suicide, of having Parkinson's, of having dementia, right? Um, why is that? Right? A lot of people think it has to do with brain damage that gets accumulated. So that's just one example, but there's so many more: Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADHD detection. There's so many more things. Now we can see the entire timeline instead of just one snippet whenever you go into a lab. This could completely revolutionize how we do science and understand one another. And that right there is, I think, that's the reason why we wake up every single day, because we want to enable that future.
You've said that the current timeline for even knowing that somebody has developed Alzheimer's could be up to 10 years before it's
Hmm.
really discovered. And um, currently, if you went into a lab every day, you've said one of your friends at one of the schools in New York, if you
Yeah.
went into their lab every day and had your brain tested, it could get down to like 2 years. You would start to see development. Is that right?
Oh, close, close. So yeah, it's Columbia University. They're doing a study with Alzheimer's where they're actually tracking individuals. You know, I think they come in at least once a month. They put on these large gel caps, and then you can start to see the brain slowly trend in a specific way that suggests that they might be having Alzheimer's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and last time I spoke to them, they were telling me that like if we were able to see this, what if we could detect this 10 years before they get it, right? You start to see that cognitive decline, those biomarkers changing. You know, right now, sometimes we don't even know somebody has Alzheimer's until 10 years in, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine if you could completely flip that, right? And even if you only consider what we can do right now for Alzheimer's, which is not much, right? 10 years to like record your studies on video, to share moments with your family, because you know that all these things are going to help create memories for them to remember you, you know, to create the right resources for you to plan. Like that's already transformational.
Yeah.
But then what about science? Now we can start to track people with Alzheimer's. Now we can start trying new uh, studies earlier, right, that are preventative. Like now we can do so many things that we couldn't possibly before. And so both of those aspects are going to be game changers.
That's one of the things about what you're doing that is so amazing to me. And we could spend the whole episode here talking about what will be possible because of this, because it's not just, you know, what's possible today. That's actually my next question is kind of what's really possible in the next year to 2 years. Like if somebody buys this product, what could they expect? Um,
Hmm.
and let's get to that. But the amazing thing is this is one of those things where it creates new pathways for every other type of exploration. You know, if we could have this information in higher fidelity with more data coming in more often, it's almost limitless the number of
Yeah,
fields that could be changed by this platform.
for sure. Actually, I'll show you something that I think is really interesting. So the DoD asked us to put together a list of like all the different places EEG has been used for. And
And EEG is brain data.
exactly the brain data we collect, right?
Yep.
And it's insane. Like this is the ultimate wearable, right? This is the most important organ in our body, and we're not yet tracking it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Limitless, when it comes to your brain, limitless is like literally the right word. And for so many things, that's not true, right? Uh, but it's also the hardest, most complex system in our entire bodies that we know the least amount about. And so it really is like, and I'm not saying we're solving everything. We're probably going to be 1% of the entire solution when this is all done, but it's unlocking a very key aspect that hasn't been accessible, which is longitudinal data. So over long periods of time, you know, and continuous data,
Mm-hmm.
right? So every single day, you know, you're just watching Netflix, you're going for a walk, like all these things that weren't possible to tap into, now science and exploration has the ability to start to leverage that to better understand humankind.
It's incredible. It's one of those things where it's a way to run much larger scale experiments that will be beneficial for, again, for all of humanity, for all of life, right?
Exactly.
But also, you already have paying contracts with the US Department of Defense and others to use this product right now, right? And so,
Yeah.
what are they getting out of it today? Like, what are the use cases that your current customers in the defense sector, to the extent you're able to talk about that, are using it for?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thankfully, with non-invasive technology, there really isn't, you know, you can stay very easily within an ethical boundary. We have, you know, and my co-founder, Adam, is a data policy and neuroethics expert. So like it's something that's really important to us. we see DoD as a way of tackling some of humanity's biggest problems in an area where there's funding and people who are affected by it the most, right? And so I mentioned soldiers have twice the likelihood of committing suicide, of Parkinson's, of dementia. You know, also, $4 billion is spent just because of fatigue-related accidents. People die because they work so hard, they go to sleep and they get hurt, right? And so
Yep.
essentially what we're building with the DoD is a cognitive dashboard, right? It's a dashboard for tracking the fatigue of soldiers to make sure that they're in the right mental state, and then also long-term tracking of traumatic brain injuries. Those traumatic brain injuries lead to all those other disease states that I spoke to you about. And so that's really what we're doing. And it's like, and here's the best part. As we solve those problems with the DoD, they become software updates for your headphones,
Mm.
right? And so
Yeah.
like, that's the best part. And some people are like, how can you work with the DoD? It's like, do you want us to help solve some of the biggest problems in the world sooner? And you get them
Every
as a
major
software update?
technology, yeah, every major technology that we use today as consumers, almost everyone, I
Yeah.
think,
Microwaves?
had some
Yeah.
applications, right? How do you see, you mentioned that it's easy to, well, maybe even setting aside the ethical side, you can talk about that if you want, but just in general, what is the relationship between non-invasive brain-computer interfaces like Neurable and
Mhm.
invasive, which means you need surgery to have something put into your body, like Neuralink? What do you see the relationship between those kinds of interfaces over the course of where we are today, but then also into the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that non-invasive and invasive will probably live together for a very long time. The reason I say that is because invasive is fairly risky. The value that you get out of them is not as significant as somebody would think, right? Like for somebody who doesn't have the ability to move a mouse and click on a screen, that's enormous, right?
Yep.
But for most of us, we can just use that and we don't need to have a life-threatening surgery that needs to be redone every couple years because of scar tissue buildup that makes it so you have to reimplant the chip because the signals get weaker. Like there's so many things like that. The
Yep.
best example that I bring up is like hip replacements. They're the most
Yeah.
successful invasive surgery in the world. And you probably wouldn't get a hip replacement unless you needed one, right? Even if they made your hips like 10 times better, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the everyday version of giving people some of the biggest benefits of brain computer interface? It's non-invasive. It's the difference between like wearing Nike shoes, which are athletic performance shoes that everybody wears. Can you imagine running in a pair of boots? It would be terrible, right?
Yeah.
Versus a prosthetic, which is more of an invasive system, right?
Yeah.
And what's crazy is even people with prosthetics wear shoes, and so
Yeah.
for most people, they're going to use non-invasive. For very select few individuals, they're going to use invasive.
People are so hesitant to get any kind of invasive surgery. Like my dad's been putting off getting knee surgery for so long, even though he knows he should. And
Yeah,
it's just, you can understand, like you said, for extremely high need areas where there's just like no ability to communicate. That's incredible what they're able to do with Neuralink.
for sure.
But
Yeah, and I love that stuff. Like, let them keep
yeah,
doing it. Like I'm on board. So
right. It doesn't see, are there any points of competitive tension? Like, because it seems to me like there's very different use cases, but are there any places where you could imagine there being sort of a competitive space between the two?
I think that it's a gradient, right? The more invasive you get, the better data you get. The least invasive you get, the worse data you get. There are BCIs here in the center, like Synchron is one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you can't really do as much as a Neuralink device can, but you can kind of do, you can do all the things non-invasives can a lot better,
Yeah.
right? So there
And
might be some
how
overlap.
invasive is that? What do they do to
It's minimally invasive. You put it inside like an artery essentially, and it splays itself out up on your
Okay.
brain. I mean, it's still surgery, right?
Yeah.
For most of those benefits, like I said, you can probably get most of them from non-invasive. So there's going to be some overlap, but honestly, like, putting on a pair of headphones is just so easy. right? And so I think that
Yeah.
there's going to be gradients, but most people are probably going to pick the extremes. At least that's what we've seen with how technology goes anyways. It's the stuff in the middle that people tend to use less of. And it's more the stuff on the extremes, right? You either go high price or low price, right? You
Yep.
either go, yeah. And so that's kind of like just how we've seen the world go.
So yeah, and at this point, with this being so new and people's aversion to anything surgery related already, and the cost of surgery and so many things, like it's not like there's going to be mass consumer uptake of invasive brain computer interfaces anytime soon, right?
Yeah,
What you guys are testing, which is fascinating, and this is why this moment I thought was really interesting, because again, for people who don't know, by the time this comes out, there will be a bunch of media about Neurable's product, but right now, like, Ramses actually doesn't know what that those articles are going to say. You know,
right.
how
Yeah.
are you thinking in this moment? And recognizing that even by the time this comes out, maybe your thinking will have evolved, but about communicating the value to an average person around. I made a post on LinkedIn
Yeah.
saying I was going to interview. I didn't say you by name, but I got a bunch of comments from people I don't even know. And one of the questions was, what metrics do you use to convince people of the value? But I would actually broaden that, because metrics aren't actually how most people, I don't think, even make
For sure.
decisions. I think it's about a feeling or about a sense that it's helping them live their life in a way that matters to them. Um, how do you communicate that value to the average consumer, even to get them to put headphones on or buy a special pair of headphones, to get these sensors onto their head?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I'm not gonna lie. It's like, and it's tough, especially for our company because it's not what we did naturally, right? Like we started out doing R&D, and then from R&D we turned into a product company, and then from a product company now we have turned into a sales and marketing company. Like these are all like
Yeah.
really difficult evolutions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not gonna say that we've done it perfectly. We're still learning. We're still doing our best, right? I mean, we hired a great person. Her name is Jessica, who handles our marketing. She has a lot more experience in it than we do as the core of the company. So we're growing that capability. But I think that it came down to two things that we're still refining. One is storytelling, right? Making sure that people understand like the story of why this is valuable to them. And then the second one is making sure it actually comes back to the metrics. When that story is over, is the experience that the person had and the data and the metrics that they're seeing, does it match that story, right?
Right.
And that's super key because if they sit down and they focus and they get back the report and it turns out that it looks like they did terribly, but they know they crushed it, that completely breaks trust,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it's about telling the story to get them interested in the product and then making sure we deliver on that story once they have the product,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I mean by parts of the app I'm like horrified about and other parts I'm really excited about, right? Because I know there's still gaps. Every single day we're continuously trying to make it better and we're finding more and more of those gaps, right?
Yep.
And even though I think we have something pretty good right now, it's only going to get better. Like in 1 month, it's already going to be a completely new algorithm to what we have when the reviewers got it. And that new
Yep.
algorithm is so much better. It's like insanely better, right? And I
Yeah.
wish that they had it now because then it would make me even feel like less stressed, right? So
Yeah. That's something that Whoop, I know we're both wearing Whoops right now, and
yeah,
they've just done, I think they've done a really good job at that. That was, for me, I was a huge skeptic of wearables for a long time. And only this year did I start wearing a Whoop. And my big test for it was just, is this going to track with how I actually know my body is doing?
for
And is
sure.
it going to enhance my sense of self-knowledge? Or is it going to create sort of a contradictory story to what my body knows and get me into weird territory of sort of, what do I
Right.
trust here? And I think that's a big fear for me about wearables, is like, is this going to create an alternate story to what my body knows? And is it going to cause confusion about myself? And this is just done a great job where like it actually
Yeah.
tracks. And it's not every
Yeah.
day. Occasionally I'll have a day where I'm like, maybe did I like sleep on it weird and it caused a weird sort of reading? Like it doesn't, but that's rare. Like it's pretty
Yeah.
accurate to how I feel. And it's been a very beneficial product for me, which makes
Yeah.
me more excited about what you're doing, because it's like, if you can take the kind of experience and feeling that Whoop gives to so many people now. A lot of people are using it, and incorporate brain data, because this is just getting like stuff from your wrist. I mean, right? Like
Yeah,
temperature, it's getting temperature, it's getting, HR, heart rate variability. But if you can get brain data and have the same kind of feeling, like the enhancement that creates is far greater than something on my
for sure.
wrist. So
Yeah, I believe it's the
yeah,
ultimate wearable. So the brain, right? So
yeah.
I'll give you
So
a quick story real quick if you want to
yeah, go
see
ahead.
it. So this is me doing a 51-minute session of focus, right?
Yeah,
Now, I turned off breaks, so our system is able to tell you when to take a break when your brain is tired. I turned it off to make sure that what we're trying to sell is real, right? So you
yeah,
can see I stayed really high in focus, and then eventually around like halfway through, I started getting tired, and you see that yellow line, right?
yeah.
So I didn't realize I needed a break physically until when I stopped it right there, right?
Wow.
And so, but the brake system would have just caught it right there in the center. And what's crazy about that is like that was just junk work that I did, right? Like had the
What were you
brake
doing?
system, I was working on a slide deck um, for a conference essentially. But had I just taken a 5 minute break when like the system would have told me normally, I would have spent probably like I would have done that half an hour of wasted time where I thought I was being productive in like 5 to 10 minutes,
Yeah,
right? Like, and like moments like this is when I realize like, yeah, this is doing something, right?
yeah,
And seeing when it tells me to take a break and then I go back to being in high focus for an hour or two, like those are the moments that build trust.
yeah. That's That's incredible. It makes me think of something actually that I was going to ask you later, but I'm going to ask you now. Um, it, you are a person who is able to put in an incredibly high intensity of work over just an incredibly long period of time, with where it feels like the like you're an interesting person to me. This is why I'm so like appreciate you so much, because you're this interesting balance between like David Goggins and some sort of like very empathetic,
Oh,
vulnerable person. And it's hard for me to even completely understand how you square those. We could talk about that more later, but this is something where like how do you think about what this could do for the type person who just pushes through everything and just like
yeah.
keeps working, keeps getting things done, keeps going? I mean, a lot of that'll resonate with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of creators, a lot of people uh, who care about their work and are willing to push through to make something happen. Um, how much of that work could be done a lot better with a lot less stress? Because the other side of that coin is that the classic experience of that type person is that they are also sort of ragged. They've like
Yeah.
destroyed so many parts of their life in service of that. Um, how could something like this help? Maybe you're actually solving your own problem with what you're doing here at a deep level.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say that, it's like I mean, you're not wrong. Like I love grinding and like going as hard as I can, but seeing the data that I just saw, like that humbles me. You know what I'm saying? And like knowing that the science shows that if I were to take 10 minutes, right, to just recover, I can go back to maintaining focus, right? And so
Wow.
what that actually ends up doing is that I can still put in that level of intensity, but now that level of intensity is valuable instead of just hours. It's not miles,
Yeah.
it's distance. It's like actually that doesn't
Right.
even make sense because those are the same fucking
It's
thing. So
it's
it's
not
it's
it's not
not
just the
steps.
velocity of the wheels, it's the distance that they're traveling.
Exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly, right? It's like it's not however many steps I take, it's how far I went,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And
Yep.
that is so much more valuable.
Yep.
And that's kind of like how it's changed me. It's enabled me to maintain consistency. There's actually times where I'd be so burnt out, I actually get like irritated at everything. That's how I know I need to probably take like a couple days off. That's happening less and less because I'm giving myself the space, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes whenever my brain needs it, to be able to maintain that level of performance, right? It's just up my
Yeah.
performance essentially.
And there's got to still be a limit to it, right? Like you couldn't, I mean, it's not like you could say, oh, as long as I, take the 10-minute breaks, I can work for 48 hours straight and still be in the blue. Like there are limits to it, but it's interesting to think about, are we like bringing our actual limits down without realizing it just by operating
Exactly.
sort of suboptimally?
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's 100% it. And like that's what I'm learning. And the
Yeah.
thing is that's counterintuitive to the way that I normally try to be,
Yeah.
right? But at the end of the day, what I care about isn't how many hours that I do of work. It's about how much I got out. How much growing toward excellence am I doing,
Yep.
right? And so if it means taking a little bit more rest here, like part of building is rest, right? When do your muscles build? It's not when you're lifting. That's when they're getting damaged. It's when you're
Yep.
resting, right? And like the same thing is true with your brain, right? And that's we just have no way to really understand that until now.
Yeah. Man. It's so this is something that even like Whoop really can't do right now is real time feedback. Like Whoop is what it does your overnight. Overnight is what I can perceive as kind of the most valuable data. Although it
For
does
sure.
track strain over the course of the day, but to be able to have something that in real time could get data back to you and say pause now. I don't think any wearables are doing that yet, at least not effectively.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's actually like we came into it from that perspective, from the perspective that we wanted to have something that actively gave you information versus just reported you information, right?
Right.
And so like we got a lot more of those coming.
How much
So
harder
yeah,
is that? Because that I can understand the scientific value of having everybody wearing these headphones, even for an hour a day. If you had a bunch of people for an hour a day, every day, wearing these headphones, 10 years later, you're going to be able to understand a lot more about the human brain, right?
for sure.
But that is a very different level of how fine the data needs to be compared to an individual user, one of one, getting feedback in real time saying your brain is getting tired.
Yeah,
How much harder is that from your perspective as the person trying to get these algorithms to do that?
it's really hard, and it's even harder because we have a system that helps you focus. And so giving you active feedback can be distracting, right? So it's
Yeah.
like if you're locking in, we don't want to be like telling you, hey, you're locking in because that'll automatically get you out of focus, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this issue where like we want to make sure we're active because we think that's going to be the best feedback you can get. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't also break your ability to focus? And so it's been a huge challenge.
You don't want to
But
be wrong either,
yeah.
because that'll piss people off. If you are in flow and then my headphones tell me, hey, you need a break, I'm like, fuck you. I don't need a break.
And here's the other thing too associated with that, which is like there is times where people feel like they don't need a break and they feel like they're grinding and they're going
Yeah.
super deep, and then they
Yeah.
do, and then they have that reaction. They're like, "Why did it tell me to take a break? I feel great." And what we used to do in the studies is tell them like, "No, just take one anyways. Like we want to know if it actually helps afterwards." And what it turned out is that the majority of those individuals came back and they were like, wow, I crushed it so much better the second time I came back. Like I didn't think I
Yeah.
needed a break, but I came back and I just like crushed my work. Right. And so there's even this perception that we have to overcome, which is like
Yeah.
sometimes you feel locked in, but you actually are like, you
Yeah.
actually would benefit from a break now. Right. So there's
Oh
all
God.
these
Yeah.
confluences that we have to deal with. Right.
I mean, sometimes I'll send an email, and when I'm like when I hit send, I'm so convinced, like, oh man, like I'm so in the zone. And then I'll look at what time it is, and I'll be like, I can barely see right now. Like my whole world is blurry, and like I don't even remember what I was doing for the last 3 hours. Somehow time passed, And then I read the email later. I'm like, I really should have paused there because it wasn't as good as I thought it was. I've got to undo some of that. So there is something to that. I mean, and it's interesting where you could imagine that the early adopter of something like this is the type person who wants to level up, right?
Exactly.
I'm going to use this because I want to know, but I also am inherently stubborn where I feel like I can push into that yellow for a while. This gets into
Yeah.
the UX question a little bit of like, how do you give people feedback that, especially your early adopters who are probably the type person who would want to push into that yellow and is willing to do that. How do you do the UX? Like, what does this even look like? What does the interaction with the data look like?
Yeah.
Is it a
Yeah, that's
notification? Is it a voice? What is it?
it's actually I think that's super interesting that you bring that up because we actually had to completely change the way we think about fitness trackers because of that problem, right? Because normally when you use a fitness tracker like a Whoop or a Fitbit, it tells you your data and then that's it,
Yeah.
right? But we also have to encourage people to rest. Sometimes while they're working, like, hey, and then
Right.
take a break, right? And you can snooze it and take the break a little bit later once you're off the call, for example. But it's like sometimes people just want to continue pushing through that yellow, right? And so what we did is we made it so that you earn points, right? So you earn points. Essentially, you try to accomplish your goal every day, which is at least 100 points. It's kind of like 10,000 steps, right? So you can see in the front, it'll tell you like, hey, try to earn your, points. And you can see I'm at 239. But the way that you earn points depends on how well you're focused. So if you're focused in deep focus, you earn 2 points per minute. But if you're in that yellow zone, you're only earning one. So essentially, we're rewarding you to work when it's best for you. And then, sure, you're still getting credit, but do you really want to be in that yellow zone for a whole hour, or do you want to take a 5 minute break and then go back to that blue zone and get 2 points, right? And so we had to gamify it so that people actually felt rewarded when they were doing the right behaviors. We call it mental health hygiene. How do you create good mental health hygiene? How do you make that fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had to design an entire interface for that. And then also make sure that we do audible cues that are not distracting. And like, how do it's one entire ecosystem, how we guide people through having better mental health hygiene.
So what is I really like the sort of I'm trying to perform, and that's a number I can see. I like that about Whoop as well, where it's like they have their holistic scores, and as long as I come to trust that that score tracks with what my body over time feels, I'm okay with that, and I like pursuing that score. I love that you're doing that. How are you in the moment interrupting someone?
Yeah.
Is it a text, or is it a notification? Is it a voice?
Yeah, it's a notification that comes in and a voice that says you've earned a break, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's really subtle, and then you can snooze it because we know that you might be mid meeting, you know, snooze it, and then when you're done, take that break, right? So
Yep.
it's very straightforward. But I think the nuance I'm trying to get at is imagine, when you're using your Whoop and you go into like strength trainer,
Yep.
there's a timer there that tells you how much you're lifting and then how long your break sets are, right?
Yep.
I wish that timer could tell me when I've taken a break long enough that when I get back onto that to lift that weight, I'm going to be able to maximize my ability to lift, right? And
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
most out of it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you that. It just tells you, oh, you've been resting for 3 minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're essentially doing that for your brain, right? We're telling you, hey, you can keep lifting if you want, or you can, or after 1 minute of break, you can jump back in. But hey, if you took 2 minutes and a half,
Yep.
this is better for your building,
Yeah.
for your exercise, right? And so we're essentially doing that for the brain, which is like you take 5 minutes here and it'll give you a whole hour of productivity that is worth way more, right? Than had you
Yeah.
just continued grinding.
That's so real. I was in the gym yesterday, and I was going for PRs in snatch and clean and jerk, and
Oof.
I ended up hitting them both. But
Nice.
there was a moment, especially in the second cycle when I was doing the clean and jerk, where and I'm still relatively new to this. I started like 5 months ago. So, a PR for me is a little bit less impressive than a PR for somebody who's been lifting for like 5 years or more. But still, like you're trying to do something you've never done. And I had this moment where I was like, I just got to like go rest for a little bit. And I took like a few minutes off between attempts because I was just feeling terrible. And after that, I was able to do it.
Yeah.
But actually,
Yeah.
after that, I didn't do it the next time. I did it. I like got back, I did another one, and then I sat down, and like 45 seconds later, I was back up and like I'm going again. You know, so it's so interesting just thinking about like what the right timing for optimal performance is.
What's the best recovery timing? We don't know that, right?
Right.
Like, but that would be so useful because I don't want to be in the gym there for 3 hours. I know if I take 5 minutes of break between lifts, I know I'm going to be able to do my max, right?
Yeah.
But I also don't want to be there waiting 5 minutes continuously, right? So is it 2? Is it 3? Like,
yeah,
that would be great to know.
So I've got a lot more I want to ask you. So I think we should probably continue moving on. I do have just a lot of interesting questions from people that they submitted when I said I was going to talk to you. And I guess just kind of a couple themes that came up. One of them is questions around, I'll just read the question. It's from a guy named Steven. It says, non-invasive brain-computer interface is already great at reading signals. We know BCI can read stress and relaxation pretty consistently. Also, I'll say, that's got to be funny for you to hear 10 years later. after 10 years ago, everyone told you that was not possible.
I know, right?
But I guess the fact that this is someone who graduated in 2019 from their LinkedIn. So the fact that someone who graduated in 2019 takes that as a given is a testament to
beautiful
your work.
Thank you. A lot of people's work, that's for sure. So
yes, yeah. But he says, how well can current BCI read more complex emotions, and what would it take to get those readings? Then a follow-up is, would the mapping of emotional data like this be a necessary step in producing artificial AGI, general artificial intelligence?
Okay, let me write that note right now.
There's a lot of question there. I guess the first one is just beyond focus or like stress, attention. Is it possible to read emotions? Like, is it possible to translate to more complex emotions?
Yeah, I mean, there's new work coming out where we're getting better and better at getting more complex emotions from an individual. The way that I see it is right now, it's kind of like an era of brain-computer interface, but soon it's going to be an era of data fusion, right? We're going to have accelerometers, brain data, eye tracking, all these things are going to come together, and they're going to help us better understand ourselves. And that's going to help us essentially create deeper ways of understanding more complex emotions. Also, there's going to be new technologies developed. Right now, EEG is what we're using, electroencephalography, but in the future, fMRI could get small enough. MRIs could become, there's a company that's working on a portable MRI, for example, right? And so you're going to start to see more complex brain-computer interfaces being built. We're really just at like the iceberg of like this mass scale revolution in neurotech. So I think we're going to get there. And as for AGI, I think that I don't think an AGI is going to be possible unless we take into account the brain, because the brain allows for creativity that isn't just, combinations of what you steal from others, right? It literally allows for, hormones affect how you feel, it creates randomness inside your thinking, all these aspects. And so I think that as we learn more about the brain, we're going to learn more about how to make better AIs and vice versa. I think that they're both the ultimate questions of the universe. If we solve either one of those, we have the tool now to solve anything. Like, that's my personal opinion. And they're just going to bounce off of each other and turbocharge each other.
What do you think are the ultimate questions of the universe? I know the answer is 42, but I don't know if we got to the question yet.
I was about to say 42, but I'm
rereading the whole series right now, actually.
I'm probably going to get a little bit like crazy futurist here for a little bit, but like, Imagine we had a civilization where we could accomplish anything. We could change our biology down to a cellular level. Imagine we could upload our consciousness. Imagine we could restart the sun, right? Like that kind of crazy stuff, essentially being able to answer any problems, which is what I think being a human is about. We were the first animals to essentially move away from our genes being what kept us alive to creating means to keep us alive. We started doing that by creating jackets, right? So we can go to colder environments. Now we're creating, we have penicillin. Now we have, gene therapy. We're using radiation to kill cancer. Like we create the means for our survival. That is the one thing that we're unique to. And when I mean the ultimate, questions of the universe, I mean like I believe as human beings we have the ability to solve any problem. That's just who we are. And I think AI and neuroscience, especially when they come together and they merge, that's going to be how we unlock all these big questions, right?
Yeah. There's something powerful to what you said about the brain being able to create more than just combinations of things that we steal from other people. That is, so it's like an emergent property, right? That's something that from complexity creates something that couldn't have been just combinations. Um, is
Yeah,
that how you think of that?
for sure, for sure. I mean, like, I think that one great example of that is, I mean, like, think about Picasso, right? Like he created, the abstract cubistic art that he created. Sure, it was inspired by African art and by Gaudi and a few other kind of inspirations here and there, but what he did was completely unique, right?
Yeah.
And he took inspiration, but then he created creation, and you can even see his style evolve over time. Where at first it was just like glimpses of what he was trying to do, and then he like went super intense into it, and then nobody knew what the hell he was drawing. And then he figured out kind of like this middle ground where it's like just enough for you to know the story he's trying to tell, but it's unique enough that it's him. And like I think that's right now uniquely human. I'm not saying that machines can't do it. I believe anything is possible, but I think that that's the human element. That's the neuroscience element that we're missing from these devices to really get us to AGI.
It would be fascinating to have had neurable headphones on Picasso while he was doing all that work. One of the questions that came in actually is could it become not just a monitor of someone's brain, but also a tool? So could it be possible to actually take a song that's in your head and somehow translate it out into data that can become music or art in some kind of way? Could it be possible to use brain computer interfaces to do that? Say somebody was completely paralyzed and
Hmm.
they had no use of their limbs at all. So you can't play an instrument or you can't, paint anything. Could it someday be possible for them to use a brain computer interface and take that music that's in their head and get it out into the world?
I mean, like the real answer is yes, because you can do anything with the brain. I think that the more nuanced answer is that initially, I mean, you can actually do music right now and art with the brain. Um, if you go to our Discord, there's people already doing that, which is really cool. They actually have brain data that they've turned into graphics and visualizations, but it's not like you can just imagine a picture and create it. We're
Right.
not there
Right.
yet, especially
Yep.
not with non-invasive systems. With invasive, I mean, there's like MRI studies where you can do things. I guess those are non-invasive too, but there are some with deeper, that they can get deeper signals where you can do that. So we know it's possible. Now, are we going to be able to do that with neurable headphones? Probably not at that clarity, but
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are working on something that's more for fun, where we're taking your brain data and we're turning into sounds, so you can kind of hear
Yeah.
your brain, right? So like those kinds of things are possible.
Translating almost like this type of, okay, now that we can see the data, um, then an artistic decision can be made to correlate this type of data with these types of sounds and frequencies.
Exactly.
And then you could see what kind of music comes out of that. It's even if it's not sort of like having a melody in your head and getting it out through
For
this,
sure, for
right?
sure. But it'd be cool to see like how does your emotion sound, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're focused versus relaxed or when you're stressed, like, you know, and if you get good at moving between those mental states, then like you could compose something, right? So there's some
It,
cool things that you can do with it.
is there anything non-subjective about that? Like, is there, if you have that data today, or you're saying people are already doing this, is this just an artistic choice someone's making that they want this data to sound like this right now? Or is there anything objective about that you could say this type of data translates to audio data in this way, in some kind of
Yeah.
real way?
It's a little bit of both. It's up to the artist. Like for
Yeah.
example, one of the best ways we can pick up from the brain is alpha, right? Um, which is a low frequency wave, and you can actually just make that frequency the exact frequency that somebody hears. So there is an objective like one to one if you wanted to do that. But theoretically, an artist can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. Do you have a hard stop at some point, by the way?
I
Could you go
probably
30
have
more
like,
minutes?
yeah, I can go 15 more minutes.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah. Like
Let's
20
do some.
max. I can do 20 max.
Okay. All right.
But I'm having a blast, so it's
After
like,
that, we're in the yellow, and that's can't
yeah.
have that. So one, you know, you mentioned the concept of stealing things from others. One of the big questions that, not that you've done that, but the idea of humans do that. We take data from everywhere and combine it into our own purposes.
Hmm.
One of the big questions about this, obviously, is security and privacy of this data.
For
It
sure.
feels like something even more precious than other sources of data, which people are already really concerned about.
Yep.
Um, how do you think about that, and what are you doing about that?
Yeah, thankfully my co-founder is a data policy neuroethics expert, so he thinks about it all the time. And we've designed the system in a way to make sure that we are as protective as possible to the individual. So the individual owns the data. We don't send any identified data along. So the headphones actually do all the processing on the device. And we did that so that when it gets sent to the app, it's as abstract as possible that we don't know who you are. And the other
Mm-hmm.
thing too is you never have to send us the data. You can actually run an entire session without using the app. It's just if you want to get insights, then we have to process it a little bit, so you do have to send it, right? But essentially, we created all of these steps to make sure that we protect the data. On top of that, we don't sell it. Like that's not our business model, right? Which makes it so that we're incentivized to protect the data ethics because that's actually a reason for people to buy the product, our product versus, let's say, a competitor in the future, right?
Yep.
Because since we don't make money off of the data, it means that we're giving you the value and you can feel protected by it. And so we're not incentivized to do the wrong actions. So we do a lot of steps like that. And on top of that, we have secure servers, we encrypt everything, we follow HIPAA standards, we're working on GDPR, like et cetera, et cetera.
Nice. If there's anyone that I would trust with this, it's you.
Oh, thank you.
I want to talk about you a little bit. Maybe the last 20 minutes we can do that, or maybe we're down to 15 now. But one of the most fascinating things about you is that you are a person who's willing to work incredibly hard, like I said, for a long time. But it's not just that. It's, a lot of people work hard for a long time. You've been working very hard for a very long time on something that people for a long time told you was not possible.
Yeah.
And people who ostensibly knew what they were talking about, right? Even today, I've seen you meet people who know this field and claim that what you're doing is not possible, and then they come to your office and they leave and they're like, holy shit.
And then there are advisors, which is amazing. It's like,
yeah. How did you get started on this? Like, what led you to this? What are the sort of curiosities and mission that got you started on this in the first place when everyone said that it wasn't possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to me, this is like a deeply personal mission, right? And I think that that's what made it gave me a lot of resiliency, right? So the first kind of spark was when I was about 8 years old. My uncle got into a trucking accident and he lost both his legs, and obviously it was a traumatic event for him. But he was also like my hero. He was a mechanical engineer. He always kind of solved a lot of key problems, and there was so much racism toward people with disabilities in Mexico that they actually like fired him. Even though he had prosthetics and he could have gone back to doing what he was doing, but like that just didn't sit right with me, right? And so that's when I decided to dedicate my life toward how do I solve these kinds of problems. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, so I went to electrical engineering because my uncle was an engineer, he was a mechanical, but I wanted to do electrical. And I started working with prosthetics programs at the University of Washington. And then I thought to myself, like, man, I really want to make prosthetics that are brain controlled, right? To make them more fluid, to help. If somebody like my uncle if nobody could tell that he had a walking impediment, they wouldn't have fired him, right? Like that was my mentality. And obviously it was pretty naive now that I look back, but like that's what I was thinking. And so I went to grad school, I got my PhD in neuroscience, and that's when like my eyes were completely awakened, right? And I was like, holy crap, like there's even bigger problems than like prosthetics. There's like people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's that don't know they have this disease until 10 years in. There's people committing suicide because of depression. Like there's all these, like we know so little about the brain. And part of the problem is that we're capturing it at a scale that's just not, it doesn't allow for rapid learning about the brain itself, right? What
Hmm.
if we could accelerate brain research from something that's done, once a month to something that can be done every single day, right? What if, and that's kind of like where that new mission began. And then that's where a lot of the naysayers came about, and their perspective was like, well, the reason that doesn't work is because you need a ton of sensors because there's such bad signal. And I said, okay, well, I'm an electrical engineer. When we deal with bad signal, we fix the signal, right? And so I spent years doing signal processing. That's what I'm saying, like, especially with the team now, we primarily have a lot of electrical engineers. It wasn't a silver bullet. It was a ton of lead bullets, right? It was many, many years of going back to that signal and saying, we can do better. How do we make it better? Right. And every time we hit a roadblock, instead of thinking, oh, this is it. I guess this is the max. It's like, all right, well then how can we overcome that? And I'll tell you one quick story, which is we had an engineer come in, and the standard in neuroscience right now is that 30% of people can't use a brain computer interface because they have something called BCI illiteracy, or brain computer interface illiteracy. And I remember our first version of the system only worked on about 80% of people. And the BCI researchers that I was working with were like, well, that's pretty normal. We should consider this a win. Like, let's ship the product out. And I was like, no, it has to work on everybody. Like, I don't believe that BCI literacy is real, right? Like, we have to find a way. Like, their brains must be different, right? All brains are different, right? Why do and so we actually created this new algorithm. We did it. It's called Eevee. It's named after a Pokemon because it can evolve depending on like what, you know, essentially how you interact with it. And so this new algorithm can evolve based off of your brain state, right? And it wasn't BCI literacy. It was we make BCIs in the wrong ways, right? But we had to be humble to ourselves and be like, it's our fault. It's not the BCI's fault. It's not the person's fault. It's our fault. How do we solve that problem, right? And it's just doing that for 10 years, and that's the secret sauce, right?
Just do that for 10 years and you'll get what is I mentioned earlier that you are a unique combination of sort of toughness and grit and sort of vulnerability. In my experience, the people that I've met, what is your relationship to fear?
Yeah, phew, that's a great one. You're gonna make me get all vulnerable now, huh?
The last 15 minutes. Anyone who's still listening deserves to
Yeah.
hear some of this.
I mean, like, everyone has fear. That's the truth. It's what you do with it, right? Does that stress response energize you or does it take you over, right? And what's crazy is like it really depends on what aspect it is in my life, if it's like if it has to do with like making a decision at the company that like to overcome a particular challenge, like it excites me. But I had to learn that. It wasn't like it was it was, going into that situation and continuously making the decision to do the hard thing, right?
Hmm.
So it was like exposure to therapy essentially, right? But now I'm able to control that and excite, and feel excited about it. For some reason, I'm still scared as hell to like ask a girl out sometimes. So and this is the crazy
Context
part about
dependent.
it. I'm like, man, like talking to VCs is kind of like asking a girl out to a certain degree, right? Like you
Yeah.
show yourself off, try to get their check. I'm like, bro, I just asked somebody for $2 million and I can't ask this girl for her number, like,
Context dependent.
so, so, but then that also puts it into perspective. I'm like, yeah, I can do this, right? But the moral to that story is like, see areas where you are being brave and use that to embolden yourself in other areas, right? And
Yeah.
then see those moments as exposure therapy to get practice at taking bold decisions.
That's such good advice because it doesn't deny that things are hard and that you feel fear and that you feel alone and that you hurt, there's pain, but it also doesn't wallow in it, And I
No,
think that's what I admire so much about you is that you don't wallow. You're just like, but you're not an asshole who just pretends that everything's easy and that you're just the toughest guy in the world. I mean, it's a really admirable thing. It's one of the things I admire most
appreciate
about you.
that.
We haven't
It's
even talked about entrepreneurship, which is wild. So I guess we'll have to do another episode later because we've talked a lot about research and the product, and that's where your heart is in building this incredible product to help the world in so many ways. But you're also CEO of this company, and you've built this team, and you've raised more than $30 million, and there's a lot more to talk about. So we don't have time now. I want to respect your time. So just some closing questions. Through all of that, are you 34 or 35 now?
38.
You're 38. Okay. What
Yeah.
is 38-year-old Ramses? What are some of what's a part of yourself that you feel that you have hard earned through that kind of
Oof.
bravery, suffering, the whole experience that you've put yourself through and gone through, that maybe even is because of behaviors of a 25-year-old Ramses that no longer exists. What's some of the hard-earned part of yourself that, as a result of who you were when you were 25, mistakes that were made that now you have within yourself?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think we might have to cover that on the next podcast. You got an easier one to close things out? Because that was really tough. That's one I think you got to set ahead of time, just to be honest with you. Like, I don't know. I was pretty dumb back then. I feel like every 10 years I look back and I'm like, man, you were so dumb. So yeah, I wouldn't know how to answer that right now, just to be honest with you. To be fully transparent about it.
Yeah, that's a hard level of self-reflection. I think, just to like give an example, like for me, I was so caught up in what other people thought about me for a long time. And that led me to behave in some ways where, in hindsight, I thought I was doing it because it was true to who I was, but it really was for what other people thought. And that's not a good path because you don't know if the people that you're reacting to and basing your behavior on are the type person that you want to be. And I did some things where in hindsight, it's not who I wanted to be. And today I care a lot less about what other people think, but it took a lot of suffering of having done some stupid stuff, to get me to that point. But as a result, like I don't think like when you and I met up in Singapore randomly and ended up having like 2.5 hours heart to heart, I don't think I could have had that conversation if I hadn't fucked up and had to be
You
like,
know?
man, I was acting out of how I wanted other people to see me. That led me to a weird place, and now I'm sort of trying to figure more out who am I
You know?
and what do I do with this. Um,
I think I have one for you.
okay,
This wasn't when I was 25, it was when I was much younger, but I think it was like the most important thing that ever happened to me in my life, right? Which is that I learned that I define myself. I remember when I was in high school, I was like depressed and like I felt like I was a loser and like I was bullied all the time as a kid, and like I was just not in like I thought I was a failure. I was doing poorly in school, right? And like I just didn't think that I was ever going to do anything great in this world, right? Like I wanted to, right? But I never felt like that was who I was going to be. And I'm still not there, honestly. Like
yeah,
until this product sells and goes into the world and actually helps, like this mission isn't over, right? Like I'm still haven't done that much, right? Like I just now have the potential to actually get there, right? But I think what really made me understand and change my mentality is that I'm responsible for myself, that I define myself, right? And I'll give you an example. I remember when I was playing soccer, the soccer leagues usually essentially do their recruitment, their cutoff date is January 1st, right? And there's now this huge study that was done in this book called Outlier, and they've done it in a whole bunch of other studies, but essentially kids that are born later on, they essentially have an advantage to get onto these teams, right?
yeah,
I was born too early, right? And so essentially, like going in, everybody was essentially like a year older than me. So they were all better than
right,
me. They were all like, and I remember, I was in high school and I was playing in soccer and I've spent most of my like soccer life kind of just being, average, right? And my soccer coach comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, like, you know, he's like, do you see that guy over there?" And he was one of the assistant soccer coaches, and he had on essentially like dress shoes while playing soccer, and he was kicking all of our asses, right? Um, and he was talking to me because I was complaining to him about how like I wanted to improve but I couldn't. And he's like, "Do you see that guy over there? It's not the shoes that make the player, right? It's the fact that he's obsessed with the game. He plays every day. You know, he wakes up, he eats, sleeps, and drinks soccer. Like that is his life passion, right? Even if he doesn't have the fancy shoes, he just plays with his dress shoes and he doesn't care. And that changed my mentality about everything because I was like, wait a minute, maybe it's my fault that I suck, right? Maybe I need to go out there and like instead of just going to practice, I need to practice every single day, right? And reading the book Outliers kind of explained a lot of it where people need to reach that 10,000 hours. And, depending on when you're born, it's easier to reach those 10,000 hours than other people. But success compounds, right? And that's the whole concept behind it, which is like you need to realize that you define yourself. It doesn't matter, if you were born on a particular day or that have this disadvantage or that disadvantage. I can list you all the disadvantages I had as a kid, right? ADHD. I was an immigrant. English was my second language. I have flat feet, so I'm not even supposed to run fast. Like I can go on and on and on and on and on,
and
right?
yet you ran the Boston Marathon.
And yet, I ran the Boston Marathon with a month and a half of preparation, right?
and managed. This is just like the perfect encapsulation of who you are. I laughed so hard when you told me that story. Ramses has the all-time record, or at least at the time, for highest strain score on Whoop. Uh,
Yeah, the CEO emailed me about it. He's like, "Hey man, like what the hell happened to you today?" like, like you broke the world record for strain essentially, right?
previously held by LeBron James.
Yeah. So like you define
I love your answer.
yourself,
You're like, I'm just in a
right?
lot worse shape.
He's like, how'd you do it? I was like, I'm just in a lot worse shape than LeBron. That's it, man. Like I did something hard in worse shape than somebody else. That's it. But that's the
Well,
moral, which is like you define yourself. Like who do you want to be? And then put the hours in, you know?
yeah,
Hard work beats talent
yeah.
over time. That's it.
Well, I don't know if you can hear my dog howling in the background. She apparently has decided that this podcast is time to end. But to close, who are people when you think over the course of your journey? Who's actually? I'll just say one person, just so that no one feels left out, because you could not mention a bunch of people, but just who's someone who comes to mind, who's been important to you, that you're really grateful for in this moment, and why?
Yeah, I would say it's Richard Sheridan. You know, he's from Michigan. He owns
Oh
a company
yeah,
called Menlo Innovations, right? Wrote the book Joy Inc. But I remember, you know, I never went out there to be a CEO, right? I went out there to first be an engineer, then to be a neuroscientist. You know, all these things have been driven because this is what the mission needs to succeed, right? And so the mission needed me to become a CEO. And honestly, like I didn't know how to build a team. I didn't know what leadership really was, right? I knew how to sit down and run experiments or debug circuits, right? And he gave me two books, Leadership of Self-Deception and Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And he basically said, like, let these be your Bible. And I remember reading them every single month, and I still do. I still read them like at least once every 1 to 2 months. You know, and like
you were
that's
reading it with your team when I was there a couple months
you know,
ago.
look, that entire row right there, that's leadership and self-deception. Like how many copies we have, right?
You gave one to me. I love it. Yeah.
And so like he changed my life. He's the one who gave me the tools to succeed, to build a team. And I'm still not a great leader. I'm working on it every single day, right? And if you think you're great at something, you stop being great at it. That's my belief, right? So like I work on it every single day. And like, but I wouldn't have had the right direction if it wasn't for Richard.
Man, Rich made such an impact on my life too. Rich,
You
I
know,
hope you're listening to this, because you've meant more to so many people than you probably even realize. But well, hey man, this was awesome, and I think we probably just scratched the surface of what we could talk about. So we'll do another episode and talk more about entrepreneurship. But I'm so proud of you, and I can't wait to
thanks, man.
see not even what the initial reaction is from the world, but just what this becomes over time, and to see the level of mission commitment that you have, where it's not even, I know for you, it's not even about money or about your own personal glory or anything like that. Like, I know that even if Neurable was sort of the first to market, and someone else later on came and built something greater, you would still be so proud of that. And that's just an amazing trait. And I love you. I appreciate you taking the time.
You too, brother.
And yeah, look forward
Yeah,
to all that's to come.
sounds good. No, thank you. And when we do that entrepreneur one, I'm gonna have to give you interview questions too, because like your story is also amazing. We'll do like a dual podcast thing or something. It'll be fun.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. All right. I'll see you later,
Take care.
man.
Bye.